Freckles, I got so many answers to that question, I wouldn't even know where to start.
Hello everyone, it is me, Seanie B, and today we're going to talk about everything that happened in the 10th episode of Season 6 called The Package. The package in this episode is referring to two different things: the physical package, the person behind the locked door, and then also the money, that's Jin's package, or Jin himself, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. Okay then, time for the awards.
And boom goes the dynamite.
Alright, great job to the 15 of you down here. I don't know how you guys get it that fast. Okay, this episode had a lot of little clues that gave us answers from the past and an idea of where the future is going without directly telling us how it'll do that. And I'll try to go over all of that in this recap. Alright, this week I'm going back to the way I did it before the last episode with Richard, starting with the flash sideways and everything that happened with Jin and Sun, and then going to the island and everything that happened there, so here we go. So we start off with Jin and Sun, still at the airport in the Flash Sideways timeline, and the customs officer won't let Jin take the suitcase with the money in it, making them leave. Jin tells Sun that he needs the money for his meeting, claiming her father wanted him to give the money and the watch to a client. They go to the hotel, where Jin wants to sleep in a separate room than Sun, telling the clerk that they aren't married. Obviously, we know in the original timeline that they are married. Upstairs, at room 842, Jin knocks on Sun's door, telling her that he's going to the restaurant to deliver the watch. Sun has other plans though, as she unbuttons her shirt and Jin can't control himself. The next morning, they hear a knock at the door, so shirtless Jin goes to hide in the bathroom, while Sun checks herself out in the mirror, and she gives herself a long, puzzling look into the mirror. And like I was saying a couple episodes ago, every character that's had a flash sideways in Season 6 so far has had a sort of mirror moment where they look deep into a mirror, they have a sense of deja vu, knowing something's up, and I'll talk about it later in this recap. It turns out Kimi is at the door, and he barges his way inside. Sun gives him the watch, but he wonders where Jin is with his money. Omar comes in to help look for Jin, and they open the bathroom door to find Jin standing there like he's ready for some Mortal Kombat. Kimi demands the money, and Sun tells Jin in Korean that she'll pay from her own account. Kimi's like, I feel like I'm in some Godzilla movie. And tells Omar to get Mikhail, who can speak 9 languages. Mikhail comes, translates, and offers to take Sun to the bank to get the money. Kimi agrees and says he'll take Casanova, aka Jin, to the restaurant. Giacomo Casanova was a famous womanizer in the 18th century and also famous for the art of seduction, just like Jin apparently is. At the bank, they find out that Sun's dad, Mr. Paik, closed Sun's account. We go to the restaurant where Kimi and Omar bring Jin into the freezer, accidentally bumping his head, and they tie him up. Kimi tells Jin that Mr. Paik knew all along that Jin was with Sun, so he was paying Kimi the $25,000 to kill Jin for him. A bit later, Jin can hear gunshots outside, the same scene we saw in the Sundown episode, and then Saeed opens the freezer door. Jin asks for help in Korean, but Saeed doesn't understand him, so Saeed gives him a box cutter to free himself. When Sun and Mikhail finally get to the restaurant, they see all the damage that Saeed Van Damme did, and find Kimi alive. Just like he was alive on the island after Richard shot him, he's alive now also when Saeed shot him. Kimi says to Mikhail, "You idiot, turn around." Jeez. Because Jin's pointing a gun at Mikhail. Mikhail grabs the gun, they struggle, he gets 2 shots off, and then Jin shoots him back with 2 shots right in the eye. Talk about irony. And this is probably an example of course correction, which Eloise always talked about. Mikhail is supposed to lose his eye in every timeline, and as we know, he's also missing it in the original timeline. Sun is crying, holding her wound over her stomach, and wails out that she's pregnant. This either means Jin doesn't have sperm issues like he did in the original timeline prior to the island, or it means Jin isn't the father, but I'm sticking with the first one, like he's always meant to have Ji-yeon. Alrighty, now let's talk about everything that happened on the island this episode. Flock's group is lying around the beach as Jin and Flock talk. He tells Jin that the only way they can leave the island is if all the candidates whose names are not crossed off leave together. The man in black goes over to Saeed and tells him that he's leaving for the night. Saeed claims that he can't feel anything: anger, happiness, pain. Flock says that's probably best for what's about to come, and leaves. Jin tries to leave and find Sun, but Sawyer stops him, and then all of a sudden they're all shot with tranquilizing darts from Widmore's crew. Zoe and crew find Jin, the guy they were looking for, and take him back to the sub. We go over to Alana's group where she tells him that Hurley will bring Richard back. Miles is like, yeah, maybe if he's covered in bacon grease. Sun's kind of angry that they haven't found Jin yet, so she goes off to her vegetable garden when the man in black appears to her and tells her that Jin is with his group. She doesn't believe him and says that he killed all those people at the temple. Flock replies that those people were lied to and could have come with him but refused to. He then tells Sun that he doesn't want her to do anything against her will, but that he wants her to come with him. She runs away, the man in black chases her, and she hits her head on a tree, blacking out like this moron. After a while, Ben comes over and finds her unconscious. She eventually wakes up and begins to speak, but only in Korean. Ben asks who did this to her, and she answers, Locke. So the man in black goes back to his group and finds them all unconscious from the attack. He wakes Saeed up and asks where Jin is. The next scene we go to is in the sub, where Jin wakes up from his dart nap and finds himself in room 23. Remember, this is the room that we saw Carl in during season 3, and we also know that Walt went into. If you've never seen the Missing Pieces video with Walt in room 23, it's definitely worth watching. I'll put a link to it right there. Click that little video box. Or I'll put a link over there on the side so you can click on it there. Jin turns on a switch and the Dharma rave music starts, as we see the same slideshow as we saw before, like the slides with, we are the cause of our own suffering, everything changes, God loves you as he loved Jacob, and so on. Zoe comes in and she explains to Jin that Dharma used this room for subliminal messaging experiments. Okay, I've only talked about it briefly a couple of times throughout these recaps, but I've only started doing them since season 4, and room 23 was first shown in detail in season 3. So I know a lot of you probably already know this, but a lot of you also don't, and I figure this is probably the last time I'll be able to show this video to you guys. Figure it'll fit into the recap nicely here. Here's the video of Kate, Sawyer, and Alex going to the room with Carl's in. He's watching the video. I'll play it forward the first time and then backwards so you can hear what it says in the background. And here it is as we saw it live. Now pay attention to the noise in the background. I'll play it a little bit louder so you guys can hear it. You can't understand it only backwards, which I'll play after this.
Only fools are enslaved by time and space.
Now here's the scene backwards, and I'll make the audio a little bit clearer so it stands out more. It's easier to hear what it says.
Only fools are enslaved by time and space. Only fools are enslaved by time and space. Only fools are enslaved by time and space.
Zoe says that they went through a lot of trouble to find Jin, and she hands him a grid map that Dharma used to show pockets of electromagnetism around the island. She also shows him that he himself, Jinsu Quan, signed the papers, and as we all know, he probably did. At least we have to assume he did, because remember back last season when they were in the 70s working with the Dharma Initiative, we saw Jin using the grid maps to try and find Rose and Bernard. The energy on the island could be what's released onto the world in the original timeline if the Man in Black somehow does leave, causing the timeline to cease to exist and making the alternate timeline the only reality. And I'll talk a lot more about this at the end of this recap. Jin says he only wants to talk to Charles Widmore, and Zoe says that's exactly what Widmore wants. We go back to Flock, where he tells Saeed that he's taking the outrigger canoe to the island, and asks if Saeed's a good swimmer. He also tells him to wrap his gun in plastic. The Man in Black talks with Claire and tells her that her name isn't on the wall, even though it is, or at least it's Aaron's, and that Kate's isn't either, even though hers is on the lighthouse, but says that he needs Kate to get 3 of the other candidates to join him. Before Flock heads over to Hydra Island, he talks with Sawyer and lets him know that he's gonna find Jin. When Sawyer asks why he can't just turn into Smokey and fly over there, the Man in Black implies that the monster can't go over the water. I think it has something to do with the track sounds, like the railroad track sounds that we hear, somehow binding it to the island, preventing it from escaping. It could be related to the electromagnetism that Zoe mentioned, which I talked about a little bit ago. Or it might be that the monster is dependent upon those pockets of energy scattered throughout the island to consume the power of Smokey. We go back to Alana's camp, and Jack thinks the reason Sun can understand English but only speak in Korean is because she has aphasia, and that's usually usually only temporary. It could be that by bumping her head, Sun is somehow connected now with the alternate timeline version of her, where she can't also speak English in the alternate timeline. And this would be sort of like a bleed over between the two timelines, such as we see with Mikhail's eye and Jack's scar and so on. Richard waltzes into camp and tells them all to pack their bags because they're leaving. He asks Ben where Locke is, and Ben tells him that Locke said he would be on Hydra Island.